The Falcons rebound with an impressive win, restoring their run game and finding their brand new kicker.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And if you don't know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman, been covering the Falcons for almost 2 decades, formerly at FalcFans.com, RIP, still going strong. That's the very humble host of this illustrious podcast. And I thank each and every one of you that goes strong with me as everydayers. That means you make this very humble podcast your first listen each and every day. And all you got to do to become an everydayer, subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So today we are recapping, giving that rapid reaction to the Falcons' impressive Week 2 win over the Minnesota Vikings on Sunday Night Football. We'll talk about how the rookies stepped up, the pass rush, being phenomenal. We'll talk about the Michael Penix pump meter, Zac Robinson's play calling, but we got to start the conversation with the run game restoration, as well as, the big revelation on special teams, which is John Parker Romo. But let's start with the run game, right? This game was really a restoration. This really was a statement game for the Falcons when it came to their run game. They finished this game with 218 yards rushing. The expectation going into the week, we talked about it all week long. They got to get back to running the football. They got their butts kicked in the trenches, or at least the offensive line did last week against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. And we talked about it going into the week. Like, there was going to need to be some manhoods challenged by this coaching staff, especially offensive line coach Dwayne Ledford, and getting these guys to get back to a version of this offense and a version of this run game that is significantly better. We knew going into the season, losing Caleb McGarry, that the run game was not going to be as reliable, as consistent, as effective as it has been the last couple of years, but it shouldn't have been as ineffective as it was in that Week 1 game against the Bucs. And you basically swung that pendulum all the way back with this type of performance, and really a big sort of statement for the Atlanta Falcons, right? You got that late game surge from the Falcons, really, I think, going into the, with like about 9.5 minutes to go in the fourth quarter, the Falcons went on, I believe, a 16-play drive, if I'm not mistaken, ate up about 6.5 minutes to finish with their lone touchdown of the game, capped off with a Tyler Algier 5-yard touchdown run. But Bijan Robinson finishes with 22 carries for 143 yards. Tyler Algier had 76 yards on 16 carries, including several hard charging runs at the end of the game on that final drive. And you wanted to see this run game again get back on track. It's just, the question, of course, is going to be, is this going to be the norm for the Falcons run game? Again, right now, as we sit here, we got one game of bad run game, one game of great run game. Probably the average is going to settle somewhere in the middle. But, again, 216, the average between 218 and whatever we had last week was like 58 or whatever ridiculous low number it was. Someone do the math for me. What is that, like 130 or something like that? I think that's translates to like a top 10 rushing attack. So we'll take the middle ground on that one, somewhere around there. So good performance from this Falcons run game. Another thing that stood out in this game, that really stood out in the game, was the special teams, right? Another rebound performance for that special teams unit that really struggled last week. Obviously, the big headline was Younghoe Koo. Later in today's episode, we'll talk about, the great coverage from, of all people, Mike Ford. Yes, I have to give Mike Ford his flowers on this podcast. So make sure you stay tuned for that. But I'm saving that to the very end because I don't want to do it. But, Younghoe Koo, the kicker, that was the big concern coming out of last week, where he missed a potential game-tying kick that would have sent that Week 1 game against the Bucs into overtime. And the Falcons opted to replace him with John Parker Romo, who they scooped up on the practice squad, elevated him from the practice squad yesterday. Koo did not travel with the team, and Romo went out there and vindicated the Falcons coaching staff for rolling with him. He went 5 for 5. hit field goals of 38, 29, 33, 33, and 54. The Falcons went 1 for 5 in the red zone. Their only successful red zone conversion came on that final drive, where they were just kind of just milking clock and bleeding clock at the end and just sort of, pounding the rock on the Vikings to end this game, where Tyler Algier really stepped up. But prior to that, like anytime the Falcons got inside the red zone, their offense just kind of ground to a halt. We'll talk later about, some of the causes of that when we get to Zac Robinson. Play calling, which will probably be the only negative things that we say on this spot. Well, knowing me, you guys know I'll slip something else in there, but that will be the main negative topic that we'll talk about, but we'll get to that later in today's episode. We'll save that to the end. But Romo kicked really well, right? It was a rough start, like the 38-yard field goal on the opening drive, barely kind of went in. It almost hooked wide, but it got just over the crossbar, so it still counted. And then he's kind of settled in after that point. And so I think it's very clear after this game that John Parker Romo will be the Falcons kicker moving forward. I expect the team to move off of Younghoe Koo at some point this week with his release, probably Monday or Tuesday at this point. So, this is an unceremonious end to Younghoe Koo's illustrious career here in Atlanta. And, before we move on and talk about the Falcons defense and other things, I do want to give, because of my expectation that we have seen Younghoe Koo play his last game in Atlanta, I do want to give Koo his flowers. I think we'll focus on the recent struggles with Koo, but like he deserves a lot of love for what he was able to do for his first 6 years or 5.5 years in Atlanta, where I looked up the numbers. And basically, like there were like 14 games that Younghoe Koo's kicking were instrumental in winning, with late game kicks in close ball games that he was able to make that led to ultimately Falcons victory since he joined the team midway through the 2019 season. And only despite all the, inflammatory rhetoric surrounding Koo and his recent struggles, only roughly about 4 games that the Falcons lost because Koo missed a kick. Now, one of those was, arguably last week. One of those was, that Saints game last year. People forget the 2 games earlier in 2024 against the Saints and Bucks with that Koo's clutch kicking really came through, and they wouldn't have won those games without him. And so I just bring that up just because, I know there will be a lot of people being like good riddance on Koo and all that stuff. But, those of you that are out there that are not haters like that, that don't have that hatred in your heart, appreciate Younghoe Koo, that like basically, he's basically responsible for like a third of the Falcons wins since he joined the team, or at least his leg was a major contributing factor to like a third of their wins. And so, we're talking about the difference between a team that basically averages, 7 wins over the last 6 years to a team that, probably averages 4.5 wins over the last 6 years. And so want to give Younghoe Koo his flowers. He's not going to be a Ring of Honor guy, probably because he doesn't have the longevity. But, had he played another 3 or 4 years at the rate that he had been playing the first 5 years of his career, he definitely would have been a Ring of Honor member. We'll see what, Parker Romo can do moving forward. We're going to switch between Parker Romo and John Parker Romo. I think he used to go by John Parker Romo. I think he's, trying to update it to be like, I'm Parker Romo now. He doesn't want to get confused with, Falcons legend John Parker Wilson at this point in time. So we'll switch back and forth on his name, just like we'll switch back and forth on Bijan's name. That was another thing that came up on the broadcast, but we'll move off of that. So big restoration games for the run game, big restoration games for the kicking game, a big game for the Falcons pass rush, as well as the Falcons rookies. And we'll get into how dominant a showing this defense showed as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the daily fantasy app, where making the right call actually pays off. Right? We make decisions every day, but with Prize Picks, being right means cashing in. And Prize Picks, now that football is back, it's the simplest and fastest way to get in on the action. All you got to do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you can turn your takes into real prizes all in less than 60 seconds. I put in a bunch of Prize Picks ones. Not all of them were winners, right? Zay Flowers getting 4 rushing yards really, really killed me on one of my lineups this week. on Prize Picks, but a lot of other winners, it's just easy. You just pick more or less. Kyle Pitts' receiving yards or Bijan Robinson's rushing yards, all that stuff is available for you. So make sure you download the Prize Picks app today. And when you do, use code LOCKEDONNFL, you'll get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL for $50 in lineups after your first $5 play. Prize Picks, it's good to be right. So let's talk about this Falcons defense. A dominant day for the Falcons pass rush. All the things that the Falcons, have been preaching when it comes to, defense, or I was going to say running the football to piggyback on the previous point, but let's just focus on the defense. Like we invested serious resources in that edge rusher group and it paid off today. Right. A lot of these young pieces really stepped up. According to Next Gen Stats, we'll see what my charting does when I go and break down the film later this week. But Next Gen Stats had the Falcons with 16 pressures in this game. I can't remember the exact percentage, but I think the percentage was like over 50% of JJ McCarthy's dropbacks were pressured based off of that, which is up from last week's, quote unquote official 40%. You saw, I think Next Gen had Brandon Dorlus, Caden Ellis, and Leonard Floyd tying for the team lead with 4 pressures. Ruka Rororo, Zach Harrison, and James Pierce had 3 each. You had 6 sacks in this game, right? And, I'm sure many of you are like, oh, man, it's probably been like 20 years since the Falcons had 6 sacks in the game. I looked it up. It was actually 2023 they had 6 sacks, that Colts Minshew game where they were, punishing Gardner Minshew. But they did have 5 of those 6 sacks today in the first half, which was the first time they had that many sacks in a half of a football game since 2009 is a stat that came out there. Zach Harrison and Brandon Dorlus each had a sack and a half. Jalen Walker and Leonard Floyd each had a sack. James Pierce and Ruka Rororo split a sack as well. And they really took advantage of this Vikings offensive line. We talked about leading up to this game, Darrisaw being out, the Vikings left tackle. The Vikings fans thought they were going to get him back this week, but he was a quote unquote surprise inactive on Friday, or downgrade to out. So they're giving him another week, and they paid for that. He was practicing all week, and they were like, oh, we'll give him another week. We're not worried about the Falcons pass rush. I mean, that probably didn't factor into it, but how I remember very vividly was that 2015 where the 49ers were like, yeah, we're not worried about the Falcons. We'll start who was it, Blaine Gabbert? We'll bench Colin Kaepernick for Blaine Gabbert against the Falcons, and they won the win in that game. But not, times have changed, right? It's been a long decade of teams having their get right games against the Falcons, and they did not get right the Vikings on Sunday evening. And so Justin School stepped in. He was getting abused constantly. I saw James Pierce beating him a number of times. Jalen Walker sack, I know, came off that. Leonard Floyd had a free rush off the edge. Zach Harrison had a sack strip where he was unblocked. And so a lot of breakdowns in protection. And, it was surprising to see, Next Gen have Ellis with 4 pressures in this game because, I did see a couple of times where Ellis was able to win, but it didn't seem like the blitz was really the thing that was really getting after it for this defense on Sunday Night Football. It was mostly just felt like a 4-man rush for this football team. And, you have these waves of pass rushers. You have so many players getting involved. This is basically the vision of what Nate Ollie and Jeff Ulbrich and Raheem Morris have been basically preaching with, this attack style defense, having waves of pass rusher, having multiple guys getting after the quarterback rather than having that one sort of singular alpha that, you have to game plan for. It's everybody, is getting it. So, testament to, this Falcons defense, and hopefully we get to see more games like this moving forward. We got to see some great, in addition to Pierce and Walker, the other rookies on defense really stepped up. Jack Nelson was just sitting there like, man, why not me? But, Billy Bowman had an interception Xavier Watts had an interception. I was on the crossover with Luke Braun of Locked On Vikings with my bold prediction of, JJ McCarthy has 3 interceptions. He did have 3 turnovers, that sack strip, but we didn't get the third interception. We almost got a third. Bowman almost had 2 interceptions. He trapped one against the ground and tried to pretend that he picked it off. You got to sell it. And so we almost got that bold prediction, and it would have been tough. It would have been tough for my personal brand for Billy Bowman to get 2 out of those 3 interceptions, and for the rookies to be making all these plays, right? Because I've gone on the record many times over the years that I'm not necessarily a huge fan of rookies. Or earlier, before the season started, I was like, it's a risky gamble that the Falcons are betting on all these rookies, and I want to clarify that point because a lot of people, I think, didn't understand what I meant by that. Where I wasn't saying that it's a poor decision that the Falcons are betting on rookies, right? A lot of people were like, oh, well, they bet on old guys last year and didn't work. What do you want them to do? Not bet on, it wasn't that it was making a poor decision. It was that rookies tend to be up and down. And, you got to see a little bit of that with like Xavier Watts giving up a 50-yard pass to Justin Jefferson before the half, Billy Bowman, getting beat deep by Jalen Naylor. And then, JJ McCarthy just missing the throw. And if he had completed that throw, it's probably a touchdown. And so like, it's not to sit here and be like, oh, rookies are bad, or the Falcons, rolling with their youth movement is a poor choice. I've been saying all offseason long that this is what they need to do, but it's just like you get inconsistent play from rookies, and sometimes they're up, sometimes they're down. And I think certainly Sunday night, they were definitely up. And so we'll see if they can continue to stay up. But like these are the types of performances that the Falcons were like, hey man, this is what we've been preaching. This is what we, believe that we can get. And we'll see if they can maintain that, for the remainder of the season. Will we get more games like this where you're seeing these 4 rookies, or, some of these 4 rookies, they don't all have to, dominate, but like, where one of or more of these guys each and every week is making these sort of impact plays that you saw on Sunday night. So that will be certainly something that we'll keep an eye on. The other thing that we'll keep an eye on this week is an update on AJ Terrell, who exited the game at halftime with a hamstring injury. He suffered that late in the second quarter. I did not see a post-game update on the status or severity of that, but he was very quickly downgraded to out with that hamstring injury. And so you are a little bit worried about that. And certainly I was very worried about that in the second half of the game, because the Falcons were going to have to switch to zone coverage because they don't have a guy that could man up Justin Jefferson, who they were able to keep it very much in check in this game outside of, he had 3 catches for like 81 yards. One of those was that 50-yard bomb right before the half, which was like immediately after AJ Terrell exited the game, by the way. Where he beat Watts. And then he had one late in the game on like a 22-yarder. But they were able to keep him in check. But I was certainly nervous going into the fourth quarter, where it's like, okay, well, we saw what the Vikings did last week against the Bears, where they came alive in the fourth quarter, even when the Falcons were up 22-6 and the Vikings had no timeouts. I'm like, well, this is a classic Falcons, where it's like 3.5 minutes to go. They'll give up a quick score, and then we're going to be sweating at the end. But fortunately for the Falcons, Xavier Watts snagged that interception to sort of seal that one on a overthrow to Justin Jefferson. But when you play zone coverage, you need to be able to get reliable pressure forward. Like that's been a big bugaboo for the Falcons for a million years. And today, on Sunday Night Football, they could make that switch and still be able to get the pressure there. And so they weren't burned by that. But that will certainly be potentially a challenge moving forward. Obviously, the Falcons need AJ Terrell, because that cornerback room without AJ Terrell is pretty rough. But they did. Those guys did their jobs. Those guys stepped up. Even D. Alford, he had a couple of bad moments, but nothing too glaring that anybody's gonna meme D. Alford this week. But obviously, I don't think anybody wants to see D. Alford get extended reps after this week. So we'll see on that front. But we'll switch gears, talking more about the offense. We'll get into the Michael Penix pump meter and how many pumps did Penix give us in this Sunday night action. And then we'll also talk a little bit about Zac Robinson. And I'll give Mike Ford his flowers as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. This episode is brought to you by BetterHelp. You know, sometimes we all turn to some funny places for advice, but not everyone is the right one when it comes to real support. And that's why BetterHelp is here with over 30,000 licensed therapists and more than 10 years of experience. BetterHelp is going to help you find your right match, someone clinically trained and credentialed to guide you through life's challenges. It's easy to find the right match on BetterHelp. You just got to answer a simple questionnaire, and BetterHelp is going to do the work to match for you. And if it's not the right fit, you can switch therapists at any time at no extra cost. I know for me, when I signed up at BetterHelp, big part of what type of therapist I was looking for was someone who was a person of color, and they were able to find that pretty easily. And BetterHelp is flexible. You can join sessions online from home or on the go, which makes therapy fit into your busy schedule. So as the largest online therapy provider in the world, BetterHelp is going to help you provide better access to mental health professionals with a diverse variety of expertise. Find the right one with BetterHelp. Our listeners get 10% off their first month at betterhelp.com/lockedon. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. And today's episode is also brought to you by Upside. And if you're still paying full price at the pump, what are you doing? I've been telling people about Upside for years. You're leaving money behind. Get real cash back every time you fill up with the free Upside app. You can download it right now in the App Store or on Google Play. And when you use the limited time promo code Touchdown, you get an extra 25 cents back per gallon on your first fill up. Now, you know, depending on where you are, you know, you might get 3 cents back, you might get 10 cents back, you might get 15 cents back. I know for me, I've been using Upside for years, and there's always a couple of tried and true gas stations in my area that I'm always hitting up because I know I'm going to get cash back with Upside. But they're giving you this boost, right? Go sign up now and you'll get 25 cents back per gallon with this limited time promo code Touchdown. It is a limited time 25% per gallon bonus. That's promo code Touchdown. Offers vary by user and location. Go to upside.com for terms and conditions. So let's talk about the Michael Penix pump meter. And I've gotten your feedback, guys. You're not a fan of the pump meter to the degree that you need to be, but you know what? I'm sticking with it. Okay. We'll if you have some suggestions, I will take those suggestions. But most of the feedback I've gotten from many of you are NSFW. Okay. Like, you guys are going too far. Okay. And so we have the pump meter. And so, this is piggybacking on the Kirk Cousins chaos meter that was gifted to us from Locked On Vikings a year ago. And we're just using this as a sort of rudimentary way to judge Michael Penix's performance. And to me, this Sunday night performance was a level 1 performance. Now, as I've explained before, the pump meters, there's 4 levels to it. There's 0 pumps, which basically means Penix underperformed. We won't call it bad, but we'll just say like it wasn't enough, right? Just no pumps, right? 1 pump basically is like he did an effective job managing the game, putting the team in a position to succeed. 2 pumps is, peak, it's the maximum allowed pumps. For those of you that don't know the Key and Peele sketch, that is legally allowed. And that's when Penix is at his, true form, his perfection, in his perfected form. And then 3 pumps is too many, right? That's when they throw the flag. That's when you've gone too far. It's too many pumps. Penix is doing too much, right? So to me, this was a 1 pump performance. I think Penix played reasonably well, but like the passing game just wasn't there for the Falcons. You could see a number of times he just wasn't connecting with his receivers. I don't think that was on Penix. I just think that guys weren't in a rhythm. Mooney ran this route and Penix threw another route. Ray McLeod didn't come hard out of his break on one of those touchdown throws that could have, potential touchdowns, so end zone throws, I should say, that, was off the mark. And it looked like Penix, missed the throw because I had a Locked On Falcons Insider be like, oh, Penix's accuracy is not great. And again, just watching it initially live, I don't think it was an accuracy issue. I just think it was like a timing and rhythm issue where he was throwing routes and guys weren't in the right spot and whatnot. But we'll see what the film says on that front. But, overall, not a, standout game for Michael Penix, but I think he did an effective job managing the game for what he was asked to do. Now, the question, of course, is going to be, was he asked to do enough in this game? Could he have done more? in this game, and that gets us to the one big black eye on this game is Zac Robinson, right? His play calling certainly is going to be another thing that's going to be scrutinized and questioned all week long, because the thing that stood out in this game was, despite the Falcons' success on the ground, they did not run a lot of play action. Based off of the data I saw over at True Media, they ran play action 4 times. All 4 of those times came on the first 4 possessions in the first quarter and a half, and then never again. They only attempted 2 15-plus yard throws in the air in this game, and we haven't really seen the vertical passing game manifest so far through 2 weeks that we wanted to see. We were hoping that with Darnell Mooney coming back to the lineup that we would see the Falcons being a lot more willing to attack vertically. Now, again, the question without watching the film is going to be, why weren't they pushing the ball down the field? Some of that may be owed to the pass protection not being quite as stout. A couple of stunts and twists seemed to be able to get home. Penix was sacked 3 times in this game. It looked like a lot of them were coming on the left side, and looked like Matthew Bergeron, once again, like last week. Dwayne Leffert, we need you to light that fire again under Matthew Bergeron, to pick up some of these stunts and twists and whatnot. But, the question, of course, is what was the cause of why the Falcons were, dinking and dunking? And it may go back to something that we talked about in the offseason, where defenses are playing a certain style. Like the Flores defense is well known for playing a lot of these too high sort of shells, cover 2, cover 4 type of things that are trying to take away the deep ball and force you to sort of operate underneath and whatnot. And so that may be a factor that we'll have to double check the tape to see. But it's not quite there. And you wonder, it's like, hey, maybe we could dial up some shot plays off some play action. Maybe, I know late in the game, a lot of Locked On Falcons insiders were hitting me up like, hey, where's the play action? Where's the play action? Where's the play action? And I'm like, yeah, man, where is the play action? So that will be something that we'll keep an eye on when we go through the film this week, which, as we've discussed already, talking about Zac Robinson's play calling last year and last week, I should say, and the criticisms, and also last year, and the criticisms that went with that. This is something that is going to be an ongoing situation. But so far, for the team that does not get off to slow starts, according to Raheem Morris, they have gotten off to a slow start offensively, at least in terms of the passing game. But the run game, certainly looked restored. But one of the factors that contributed to the run game restoration, lots of 12 personnel, the 2 tight end sets, right? Zac Robinson went to down a different road in this game. Looking at the next gen set, they said Falcons operated with 2 tight ends on the field on 87% of their snaps, which, according to their data, is the highest of any team in any game since 2016, since they've been keeping track of that information, which is notable because, we've been talking all the time about, well, Zac Robinson just is, 11 personnel, 3 wide receiver sets type of offense. They did use 2 tight ends a bunch against the Vikings last year. It was effective. And then they just scrapped it. Right. And that's really the only game that they really used it and it was effective, at all last year. And so they really leaned into it in this game. So it'll be interesting to sort of see exactly the different looks and ways. A lot of Charlie Warner being a fullback, much better performance for Charlie Warner this week as well, alongside the offensive line. A number of key blocks that sprang, Bijan and Algier on second levels and sealing some runs and whatnot. So, I wasn't paying as much attention, but even Jarvis gave Kyle Pitts a shout out for some good blocking in this game. So that will be interesting to go back and like, oh, Kyle Pitts, good blocking. Ooh, again, we've never been being like, I think Kyle Pitts' blocking was underrated last year. It's not good, but it was like he was hitting his assignments. Like people were giving him a lot more grief for bad blocking that I think he deserved last year. But yeah. So it'll be interesting to go back and watch the film to see, what creative, if at all, again, you can't assume creativity with this offense and this play color, but it'll be interesting to go back and watch to see how they deploy their 12 personnel. Is that something that we'll continue to see this year, or is that just specific to this Vikings team as we saw last year? So we'll see. But so with that being said, let's close out this show. Let's give Mike Ford his flowers. I've been anti Mike Ford. I've been pro General Motors. If you understand, I've been anti Ford on this podcast. We're very much, pro General Motors on this podcast because Bad joke. I know. But we were like, oh, Mike Ford, like this guy is the worst cornerback in the NFL, and he's not even that good of a special teams player. But he made a number of plays on special teams in this game, in coverage, as well as other players. Even forced a muff at the end of the game to kind of seal the win. After at the end of the game. So kudos to you, Mike Ford. You heard the slander and you stepped up at least one time. Again, I'm not going to assume that you're going to ball out for the rest of the season. You will be held accountable for the remaining 15 games this season. And absolutely, if you don't go out there and have a repeat performance of this week, then I'm absolutely going to slander you on future episodes of the podcast, because I'm going to do what I do. But again, if that's the thing that gets you to motivate yourself, Mike, to go out there and be a playmaker and be a special teams maven and earn that paycheck, hey, Mike, do you? All right. I'm gonna keep saying out of pocket statements about Ford trucks. You're not Ford tough, all that stuff. So all right, guys, that will do it for us here. Appreciate you for staying up late for a Sunday night. We'll be obviously back with more Locked On Falcons, breaking down this win and sort of looking back at this win and some of the more impressive or underrated performances that we didn't get into on tonight's rapid reaction. So continue to make Locked On Falcons your first listen. Check us out on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. And for your second listen, of course, check out Locked On NFL, who have you covered for all of this weekend's action to catch you up. 2 shows daily to catch you up on all this great week 2 action. It's all part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.